Welcome to FOBtv, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I'm really excited with my guest today. My guest is Rich Sherman. Rich is a senior fellow with the Supply Chain Center of Excellence at TCS, a colleague of mine. Rich, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. It's always a pleasure to get together and see people in this era of new virtual conversations.
I know it. Boy, this COVID-19 pandemic has thrown us for a loop. Now, I've had the opportunity here to invite all kinds of experts to talk about what they're seeing from their perspective, what are some good advice, some good points, and some good advice on how to respond to it. So I'm really excited to be able to pick your brain as an expert around supply chain today. But before we get started there, Rich, where are you calling in from?
I'm located in Austin, Texas. So we're trying to keep Austin weird.
Yes. Yeah, well, I think we're all being a little bit weird today. So tell me, what are some of the strangest changes that have happened to your life since everyone went into isolation?
Well, all my restaurants now are offering me a free roll of toilet paper if I buy a meal there. So that's a little different.
In the past, that would have been a warning. In these times, Rich, we're reading all about. It seems like the headlines are talking about global supply chains every day. Do any of these challenges that have been exposed over the last few weeks here surprise you?
Yeah, I think the big thing about COVID-19 is the really wild swings in supply and demand in unanticipated and unusual places. So unlike other black swan events where you could put a direct correlation to the source and what the issues were and identify it and begin to identify what the impacts would be, you have things like the toilet paper hoarding, shift in supply where restaurants are no longer serving meals the way they used to. So the institutional food market is experiencing close to an 80% decline, while at the same time the retail food and consumer goods market is seeing huge spikes in demand. And so how do we balance that inventory? That's what's really different. Today's response is it is not only a black swan event in the terms of black swan events, but it's also a black swan baby within the mother of black swan events that's turning up. So it's making it critical that companies, really establish a war room, get together, mobilize, and begin to identify essential product flows that they have to bring under management. It's always possible to plan for black swan events, and I think the best way is through simulation. I remember years ago when I was in supply chain optimization, we established a supply network model for Nabisco. And what we did was multiple iterations of taking in and out various capacities. So if you think about it, you have a physical supply network which doesn't change really in the event of a black swan event. What happens is that network becomes disrupted at some point. The disruption ripples through the supply network ecosystem and then creates different choke points and different issues. So if you just simply model your ecosystem, your supply ecosystem, and then begin to take pieces in and out of it to see what the cost and transportation and manufacturing impact is, you can begin to plan for a disruption regardless of what causes the disruption, and you can alter those magnitudes. Now, back in the day, we had to pick out maybe 10 or 12 different critical components of our network to model because it took so long to run the model. Today, companies can get network modeling tools where they can simulate a disruption of any kind in minutes and moments. So we can script simulation runs which will enable us to plan for the loss of or the disruption of any of the components within our ecosystem. So that gives us an opportunity to do, a best opportunity risk mitigation plan. Of course, that it's all going to be disrupted anyway, but at least you can have some sense of what a disruption in one part of your ecosystem could cause real pain for you. Does that make sense?
So, Rich, I've read a lot over the last few weeks here about how over the last 30 years, supply chains have got longer and leaner, and a lot of the products that we purchase and the components to our products are from overseas. How did that happen?
Well, what's the first rule of business in terms of metrics? Cost. Profit has two components, revenue and cost. It's really hard to control revenue, okay? You can maximize, you can go for everything you want, but you're highly dependent upon other people for your revenue stream. On the other hand, you own your costs. Now, other people will influence those costs, and there are cost trade-offs, but at the end of the day, if there's one part of the profit equation that you can exert some control over, its cost. And so that's what drives a lot of the decisions and most of the decisions in supply chain. So that said, we were running into high labor rates. I think, to be honest with you, a lot of the shift in manufacturing and sourcing capabilities over to China and Asia and India, for example, a lot of that was less than cost and more than capacity for a lot of reasons. So if you think about it, a few years ago, Wisconsin announced that they had cut a deal with Foxconn for Foxconn to build a assembly plant. Of course, Foxconn is the major supply chain component supplier for Apple, and they were going to put one of their plants in Kenosha, or not Kenosha, but Racine, Wisconsin. And so it was like exciting because, the governor had got Foxconn to bring 100,000 jobs back to Wisconsin, and everyone was all thrilled with it. The problem is Racine has less than 100,000 people in the city, and certainly less than 100,000 skilled electronics assembly workers. And so that scale is something that's unusual to North American manufacturers. We're used to plants that maybe have 500 to 1,000 employees, 50. We're not used to having a manufacturing facility with 100,000 employees. It's one of the first things you learn in globalization, if you will, is that transformation of a global organization, people don't realize that could require 3,000 or 4,000 consultants or full-time equivalents just to manage the implementation and transformation of going from SAP 3 to SAP 4. All right, so that scale has driven a lot of the global sourcing requirements. We think it's cost. We talk about cost, and certainly the labor cost has been low. But if we look at China, for example, their labor costs have been steadily increasing. And so we've been looking at Southeast Asia a little more. But the reason that we're not all of a sudden bringing all that manufacturing back is we just don't have enough trained labor to be able to actually execute the tasks and capabilities at the scale that are required. So that I think is the biggest reason why we've moved to globalization.
Interesting. So, a lot of the supply chain and logistics networks behind the scenes, the public doesn't pay a lot of attention to them until something goes wrong. So what kind of risk consideration do companies go through when they're looking to extend their supply chains overseas?
Well, as I mentioned, they're going to take into play, first of all, they're going to look at national disasters. Okay, so, what's going to be the impact of a typhoon or a hurricane? Those are the ones that are most typically plan for, because we know there is a typhoon season. So we can expect certain areas of the world are going to experience typhoons. We know that certain areas of the globe are going to experience hurricanes and thunderstorms and tornadoes. And so we can say, if we have customers and or suppliers and or production facilities or retail facilities in these areas that are highly prone to those natural disasters, we must have risk mitigation plans for that. One of the things that a lot of people don't consider is the revenue impact of the components of their products. So, for example, we were working with a medical devices company, and we found a small fastener, i.e. a screw, okay, which was highly precision machined, okay, so it was a very precise qualification and quality standard. It was very small. It was relatively low cost. It made sense to have one sole source strategic supplier of that material. They weren't real large quantities, and it wasn't really a large, dollar item. The reality was, when we went through their bills of material, we found out that 80% of their revenue generating products, i.e. 80% of their revenue, was dependent upon those products having that screw. So losing that maybe 1% of their product cost could impact 80% of their revenue capture. Okay? And so little things like that catch you. It's usually not your supplier's disruption that causes you the big problem. It's your supplier's disruption that ripples through. And that's why it's so critical to be thinking in terms of an ecosystem. We hear about the impact of our frontline first responders and medical personnel. And yet the healthcare system is experiencing about an 80% decline in employment. 80% of our public health people are out of work, okay, because we're only providing emergency services. So if you're a cosmetic surgeon, or if you're a non-quote essential surgery, if you're an elective surgery physician, you and all of your staff and that whole part of the hospital are shut down to respond to the medical requirements of the COVID. When I alluded to earlier, the imbalance in inventory between institutional food producers and your restaurants. All right. The fact is, in addition to the free roll of toilet paper, they're also selling me flour, ingredients, meats, unprepared foods. Why? Because the grocery stores don't have it, but the restaurants are over inventoried on all of that product. So we're seeing the restaurants turning not only from takeout and delivery locations for prepared foods, but they're also becoming pantries for consumable items within your home. So it's those kinds of side ecosystem disruptions that people really have to pay attention to for future disruption and future disasters. And again, simulation leads to mitigation. The more you can digitize this, the more you can simulate it, the easier it's going to be to formalize those risk mitigations and also to fund the investment required to do that. Even 5 years ago, risk mitigation could be a pretty expensive proposition. Today, it's much more affordable because we have the data to do it.
So, Rich, how do we gain visibility into a multi-tier supply chain where one of your providers uses local contractors to make additional products? They buy components from others, they buy components for others. And way down that chain is one of those really must-have products that can stop your whole supply chain. How do you monitor that entire multi-tier supply chain and have visibility into it?
We told people we're colleagues, but you really didn't write my script. That's a great question, Kevin. And I think it's leading to a new trend that I've been writing about and researching over the last maybe about 6 months. I've had a couple of articles published on it. But as I mentioned earlier today, it's all about ecosystem commerce. And what we're seeing is the emergence of ecosystem commerce platforms, which I call ECP. Gartner refers to them as multi-enterprise supply chain business network platforms. Wow. That's a real mouthful to me. So I think ECP is a lot easier. But an ecosystem commerce platform is something like a Veco International, which is a small firm that basically built a supply network ecosystem optimization platform for Hewlett Packard and their entire supply ecosystem. People like E2Open, One Network Enterprises, Infor's Nexus product. You've got Ariba, TradeShift,
Coupa,
Coupa, so you've got all these former, quote, marketplaces that used to exist that were selling and auctioning and moving products throughout the entire ecosystem, usually built around a particular industry. E2Open got its start in the electronics industry. Veco's doing a lot in the healthcare and pharmaceutical because they're based in Philadelphia. So what better way to put a startup together to be able to drive to your customers? But the key here is they're connecting everybody in the ecosystem. And the platforms are beginning to integrate with one another as well, because you have one platform which is specializing in supply. You have another ecosystem which is, getting into demand and demand planning. You have another platform that's getting into transportation. And so all of the components of an ecosystem from a functional perspective, finance, insurance, transportation, warehousing, storage, etc., all are being loaded out to an ecosystem commerce platform that can provide connectivity to the entire ecosystem. With connectivity comes visibility. With visibility comes action. With action becomes optimization. And so that's where I talk about ecosystem resource planning, where now, we're competitors, you and I, just for the example. And you're shipping product to the same people that I'm shipping product to. And now we're in an e-commerce environment where these customers aren't ordering pallet loads of the same product. They're not even ordering cases of the same product. They're ordering eaches of the same product. And we're not delivering to a retail distribution center or a retail store. We're now delivering to individual consumers. And so all of our capabilities for transportation consolidation cost savings, i.e., I'm going from shipping truckload to a lot less truckload to parcel, that's disrupting my transportation cost infrastructure. Well, we're both competitors, but we're both shipping our products to the same customers. Why don't we get together, collaborate, and combine our shipments to get full truckload pricing? Well, the chances of that happening in the near term are pretty difficult, okay? Because I don't talk to you. You're my competitor. However, if my platform provider has you in his network and me in my network, they can provide the tools to consolidate shipments, transportation, and share those cost savings across the entire ecosystem to the benefit of the ecosystem. That's where I think, supply, I'm not even calling it a chain anymore, because it really isn't a chain. It is a network. And so that's where I think enterprise supply network management is going to move to that ecosystem commerce and that ecosystem resource planning probably in the next 5 to 7 years.
Wow. Thank you for giving us that insight into the future there. Last question for you, Rich. As a result of this pandemic experience we are all in right now, what strategies would you anticipate changing within supply chains going forward?
We might not be shaking hands. I think that we're going to see more companies say, I think the ecosystem commerce vision is going to be realized a lot quicker, because people right now are understanding I am interdependent with it. If there's anything that this pandemic has done for supply chain, it has raised the visibility, to your point earlier, of how critical it is to society and to a global economy, and how much opportunity there is to reduce the cost of operating that supply network ecosystem. So I think companies are going to be driven a lot faster to digitalization. I think they're going to be a lot faster to business work model transformation. So more of the workforce is going to be working out of their home. I think that digital education is going to start to emerge much more. The University of Phoenix is probably going to get a whole big boost in enrollment out of this. I think people are going to recognize the value of ecosystems and ecosystem connectivity and digitalization. And I'm looking for us to emerge from this as a much smarter world.
Great. Rich, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day to join us and share your expertise.
Well, thank you, Kevin. In the past, it probably might have taken 5 years for us to meet face-to-face. In this world, we were meeting face-to-face, or at least virtual face-to-face, within months. So
absolutely.
Great to have you on board at TCS, and sure enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you, Rich. And I want to thank all of you out there for tuning in.